You tell yourself you're lazy. That's the simplest explanation. You delay the project, ignore the opportunity, leave the idea sitting quietly in your mind. Days pass, sometimes months, and the strange part is, you do want the life that comes with those actions. You imagine it clearly, but when the moment arrives to begin, something inside you quietly resists. Not loudly, just enough to stop you. So the real question isn't, why are you lazy? The real question is something most people never ask. What if the hesitation isn't about effort at all, but about becoming someone you don't fully recognize yet? And your brain is not always comfortable with that. 2. Problem deep dive. Most people think laziness looks like doing nothing, but what you experience feels different. You research things deeply, you plan carefully, you imagine possibilities. Sometimes you even feel a surge of motivation. For a moment, everything feels clear. You picture the future version of yourself, more disciplined, more confident, more capable. But then something subtle happens. You open the document and close it again. You consider sending the message and decide to wait until tomorrow. You think about starting the habit, but somehow the day fills with smaller distractions. It doesn't feel like a conscious decision. It feels like an invisible break, and eventually, the story becomes simple. I guess I'm just lazy. But that explanation misses something important, because if you were truly lazy, you wouldn't think about these things so often. You wouldn't feel the quiet tension of knowing you could be doing more. That tension reveals something deeper, a hidden identity conflict. Psychologists sometimes describe identity as a stable self-story. Your brain builds a narrative about who you are. I'm the quiet one. I'm the creative one. I'm the person who plays it safe. I'm the person who tries but never fully commits. These stories are surprisingly powerful, not because they are true, but because your brain prefers predictability over uncertainty. So when an action threatens to change that story, resistance appears. Not because the action is hard, but because the identity shift is unfamiliar. And the brain does something subtle. It protects the current version of you, even if that version is limiting. But why would the brain do that? 3. Reframe first. Something important. This pattern does not mean you are weak. It doesn't mean you lack discipline. In many cases, it means your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do: protect stability. Human beings are wired to maintain a consistent identity. In psychology, this is related to something called self-concept stability. Your mind prefers a version of yourself that feels predictable, even if it's imperfect, because predictability equals safety. So when a goal appears that would change how you see yourself, your brain doesn't immediately celebrate. It hesitates. Think about someone who has always seen themselves as not athletic. The moment they try to become disciplined with fitness, they are not just exercising. They are quietly challenging an identity that has existed for years. The brain senses that shift, and uncertainty appears. So instead of thinking, I'm afraid of becoming someone new, the mind translates the feeling into something easier. I'll do it later. Or, I'm just lazy. But the resistance isn't laziness, it's identity friction. And once you see that friction clearly, something interesting begins to happen. Point 4. Psychological mechanism to understand this more clearly. Imagine your brain as a thermostat. A thermostat keeps a room within a certain temperature range. If the room gets too cold, it warms it. If it gets too hot, it cools it. Your identity works in a similar way. Psychologists call this self-verification theory. Your brain tries to keep your behavior aligned with your current self-image. If you believe you're someone who struggles with consistency, then sudden discipline feels strangely uncomfortable. Not because discipline is bad, but because it moves you outside the identity range your brain expects. So the brain gently pushes you back, through procrastination, through distraction, through hesitation, not aggressively, just enough to restore familiarity. Here's another way to visualize it. Imagine walking across a frozen lake. The ice represents your current identity. Every step outside that ice feels uncertain. Your brain checks the surface. Is this safe? Is this who we are? Until enough evidence appears that the new behavior belongs. This is also connected to the brain's prediction system. Your brain constantly predicts what version of you will appear tomorrow. If your actions suddenly contradict those predictions, your brain experiences cognitive tension. And the easiest way to resolve that tension? Return to familiar patterns. But here's the hidden part most people never realize. The brain can update its predictions, slowly, through repeated evidence. Which means the goal isn't forcing yourself into a new identity overnight. The goal is something quieter, teaching the brain that the new version of you is safe and real. But how do you actually do that? 5. Practical framework. There are a few psychological principles that make identity change easier for the brain. Not through pressure, but through evidence. 1. Start with identity-sized actions instead of dramatic change. Begin with actions so small they barely threaten your identity. Psychologist B.J. Fogg calls these tiny behaviors. Your brain accepts them because they don't trigger strong resistance. What to do? Choose an action that feels almost too small to matter. Why it works? Small actions reduce threat signals in the brain's amygdala, the region involved in detecting danger. If the change feels safe, the brain allows it. Example, instead of write every day, you write one sentence. That sentence becomes evidence. Evidence that you are someone who writes. 2. Separate identity from outcome. Many people only update their self-image after visible success. But the brain actually changes identity through consistent behavior, not results. What to do? Measure your actions, not your achievements. Why it works? Behavioral psychology shows that repeated behaviors strengthen neural pathways through habit formation circuits in the basal ganglia. Your brain learns who you are through repetition. Example, if you study for 20 minutes daily, your brain slowly registers. This is something we do. Identity begins shifting quietly. 3. Reduce future self-shock. When the imagined future version of you feels too different, your brain treats it like a stranger. So the key is making that version more familiar. What to do? Spend time visualizing the ordinary life of the future you, not the dramatic success. The daily routines. Why it works? Visualization activates similar neural networks as real experience. The brain becomes more comfortable with the scenario. Example, instead of imagining being successful, imagine sitting calmly at a desk each morning and doing focused work. The brain learns the environment, and resistance decreases. 4. Allow identity lag. One of the biggest mistakes people make is expecting their feelings to change immediately. But identity always changes after behavior, not before. What to do? Expect the feeling of, this isn't really me yet. Why it works? Your brain needs repeated confirmation before updating its self-concept. Example, a person who begins exercising may still feel unathletic for months, but eventually, the brain updates the identity, not because of motivation, because of accumulated proof. 6. Integration. So maybe laziness isn't the right word. What you've been experiencing might be something quieter, your brain protecting the version of you it already understands. Think again about the thermostat. Your identity has a certain range. If behavior moves too far outside that range, the brain pulls you back, not because growth is impossible, but because growth requires new evidence. Each small action expands the range slightly, until one day, the behaviors that once felt unfamiliar become the normal temperature of your life, and the identity shifts almost without you noticing. 7. Quiet, empowering. Close. There is a strange moment that eventually happens, a moment when you look back at something you once avoided, and realize you're doing it without thinking. The resistance that once felt so powerful is simply gone, not because you forced yourself harder, but because the brain finally accepted something new, a new version of you, one that once felt uncertain, but now feels natural. So if you've been calling yourself lazy, pause for a moment. Maybe the truth is quieter. Maybe your brain was simply standing at the edge of unfamiliar ice, waiting, testing the surface, learning whether this new version of you was real enough to step onto. And the more evidence you give it, the more solid that ice becomes. Until one day, you realize you're no longer afraid of becoming someone new. You already are.